Good evening, everyone. My name's Chris Flynn. People often forget to introduce themselves at these things. I am the author of 2 books, A Tiger in Eden and The Glass Kingdom, and that's enough of that. I also have a job, a paid job. I work at the RSPCA, in the cattery specifically. I spend my day tending to sick and lost kittens.
Oh, see, that's you're so cheap. He's won you so cheaply.
Yeah, well, it always gets a bit of sympathy. That I've had a variety of writers' jobs. I used to be a sumo wrestling referee, amongst other things. I just threw that one in there. Tonight we're discussing the role of humour in Australian books, television and film, addressing in particular something that's a bit of a bugbear, I know, of all our panellists, which is, why are we so serious when it comes to our artistic output, when in reality we like to laugh so much? Joining me in tonight's deadly earnest conversation are, from the far side, Tony Jordan, who is the author of 3 novels, Edition, Fall Girl and 9 Days. Tony lives in Melbourne, where she teaches creative writing at RMIT, although she used to work as a door-to-door salesman selling aluminium siding.
Aluminium siding. That's how to really find out what someone is really like on the inside. Knock on their door in the middle of the day and try and sell them aluminium siding.
Next to Tony is Shane Maloney, who's the author of many books, particularly the Mary Whelan series. He also used to be the director, in fact he was one of the people who started the Melbourne Comedy Festival, and he was a lifeguard as well, presumably not at the same time as when you were doing the Comedy Festival.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there were a lot of drownings on my shifts.
Do you want to pull that mic on? And next to Shane is Deborah Oswald, who is a bona fide famous playwright and TV writer. Her credits include Police Rescue, Palace of Dreams, Secret Life of Us, Bananas in Pyjamas, lots of other things. She's also the author of 3 Aussie Bites books and 6 novels for teenage readers, but most recently the novel for adults, Useful, which came out in January, which I just read last week and which is fantastic. She's also, you may know her as the co-creator and head writer of the TV show Offspring, which recently finished its 5th season. Or did it?
I can't see who's out there because of the lights, so I can't say.
Please welcome our guests, Tony, Shane and Deborah. Tony, part of the idea for this event came to me a few years ago, and it was after I read the essay that you wrote on the Wheeler Centre website, back when they did those sort of long-form essay things, yes. Back in 2011 maybe it was, yes. In which it was called Dry as a Chip, in which you looked at the history of humour in Australian fiction. In particular, I remember you bemoaned the lack of lols in today's books, or the books of that day. Do you still feel that way about Australian books?
I still think that it's an underrated skill. I still think that it's just considered not quite as serious and not quite as specialised, and really it's incredibly difficult because with tremendous respect for Deborah and her sort of writing for performance and television, you have actors and you have facial expressions and you have a whole lot of other things going on, whereas we are trying to make people laugh out loud using just black ink on white paper, sitting on the tram or wherever you are and trying to get someone to laugh. I think that's a fairly difficult skill, and I think we need more respect, yes.
So because it's difficult, do you think that's why there's not as much of it as there possibly should be?
And it's strange because historically we've been quite well known for that. A lot of Australian fiction, that larrikin humour, the early Australian fiction, the Henry Lawson, etc., had quite a lot of that. But over the years we've become more and more po-faced, and it's now become a very serious kind of business, writing.
Is it because of risk aversion? Do you think are people worried that if they're funny on the page, then that's a risky thing today?
I think maybe that's it. But we seem to be we're great at making funny television, we're great at making funny movies, and we've got some of the funniest comedians around. It's just in novels and fiction particularly, I think it's a difficult thing. It's just not appreciated, I think. I might get some T-shirts made up, more appreciation for funny writers.
Shane, I guess funny has sold quite well for you, though. But do you think the crime genre is more? It sort of almost needs humour in order to provide that sort of bit of levity from what's actually going on.
Terry Lane, broadcaster, said a few years ago that no literary prize of any note in Australia had ever been given to a crime novel or a novel with jokes in it. I thought, I'm fucked. There goes the Miles Franklin. I'm not even going to get the Buddy Franklin at this rate. Well, that's my particular reaction to it. That's my particular kind of take on it. Peter Temple's now disproved at least one half of that formula. There's a few jokes in there, but very few laugh out loud ones. But I'm writing crime novels, and my ideal reader, I suppose, if we form this kind of view of the ideal reader, my ideal reader is someone sitting up the back of the bus reading one of my books, and suddenly their milkshake comes out their nose. And I fix that image in my mind as I write.
So do you think crime needs fiction, crime needs humour in it, more so than other genres, perhaps?
Well, it's worked very well for various television series and so on. It's look, any kind of I think the written word, the page, is a different kind, is a place that the reader comes to in a different kind of way than, as Tony was saying, and it's the bits that the reader brings to it that make it funny, and you never know what that's going to be. So, but like any other kind of humour, written humour is a matter of, I think, timing. And that's always very hard to judge, since you've got no idea who you're playing to, really.
I saw you writing on that out the back, but I...
Yeah, I am a writer. I feel I had to write it down before it was fully authentic.
Deb, you're someone who's always, for me, sort of walked that fine line between funny and serious very well. Do you consider yourself to be a serious writer who just understands how to be light and how to be comedic, or are you more of a comedic writer who just knows how to be serious, or should there just not be any distinction between it?
I desperately want to be taken seriously, and I just fail continually. One of my plays called Gary's House thought, right, this time it's going to be really grim, and then people will take me seriously as a playwright, and I just failed. I definitely don't consider myself a comic writer, because we were talking earlier about the fact that I'm not funny enough, but I don't think I can write about being a human being without it being funny as well. I mean, it's weird that we're in a way having this session. To me, there should be a session at every writers' festival where the title is "Humourless Fiction." Why is it so intellectually and emotionally impoverished? Like why are novelists not asked why they paint a picture of the world that does not include how ridiculous people are and how funny things are? And I know it's a slightly off topic, but why are there so many books that have no joy in them? It's this weird not telling the truth about life, to me, to not have humour in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Ireland, although I've been here for 15 years, and certainly Australia, to me, has a lot of similarities to Ireland. I always thought of Australia as just Ireland on a sunny day. And so it's a place brimming with humour for me, but it always sort of puzzled me that the books and films are so deadly serious and earnest.
And there's this idea that if something is funny or joyful, that the IQ points have fallen out of your head. And anybody, I mean, we all know writing funny is much harder than writing grim. Really, much harder. And I think maybe there's this idea that people are scared that if they laugh at the wrong thing, that they'll look daggy or sentimental, And that if you read books or write books that are super, super grim, that there's some sort of automatic gravitas about it,
Yes.
that you're sort of bringing that with you, even if that story is handled in a way that's a bit facile or without insight. Somehow, it's kind of got worthiness, so people take it more seriously.
I don't understand what's going on though, because I mean, Ireland has obviously a long literary tradition, and a lot of Irish books will represent poverty and struggle and domestic drama, disease and so on. But in Ireland, if you write a book like that and you don't include humour, then your book will be dismissed as unconvincing and unrepresentative and unbelievable, because no Irish reader will they'll always say, well, this is ridiculous. This is not what life is like. Yeah. But in Australia, it seems like the converse is true. If you do include humour, your books are straight away dismissed.
I think that's right, and I've actually tried as well, Deborah. I've sat myself down and go, right, this book is going to be serious. And I just can't help myself because the world is so ridiculous, don't you think? Like, it's so hilarious. Everything that you read and everything that you see, I just can't help myself.
What's going on though? Is it linked to sort of social struggle, or a feeling that Australian literature is not mature enough, so we need to act like grown-ups?
Yeah, I think that's it. There's a po-faced kind of thing about the more serious that you can be, like Deborah said, the more important it is, or something like that.
But who are we trying to prove ourselves to, Shane?
Well, there's this view that I think that important novels should tackle big issues, and I prefer novels that tickle big issues and see what comes out of them. Look, I don't know. The humour can be located in lots of, a range of different aspects of a novel. I never feel like I'm writing jokes or trying to be kind of deliberately funny, but the narrative voice in my novels is that of a character who sees constantly the absurdity of things, while being sort of fully engaged with them as well, in a way that, in a sense, we all are, So his remarks are his kind of personal observations about them, and I think that they're funny to the extent that they're shared, by the reader, and the tone of voice. So, I mean, I don't write. I don't think, well, how can I write a funny murder? How will someone, beaten to death with a whoopee cushion or something? The murders for me are sort of ghastly businesses that have to serve a certain function. Like, if someone's killed, I can't have the police involved, so the forensics have to be a terrible mess. So, have them run over 15 times by a semi-trailer in the car park at the fruit and vegetable market at 4 o'clock in the morning during a torrential downpour, and that pretty well disposes of the forensics, so the cops don't then become part of the story for me. So, similarly, the humour is essentially the voice of a man who is going, holy fuck, shit, Jesus Christ, what the hell, oh gosh, all the way through the novel, through the novels. So the notion, even this sort of notion that there are things that are sort of humorous and things that aren't.
Yes.
I agree with you completely. Serious books are it's understandable with the Russians and so on. I mean, it's so fucking depressing. Jesus Christ, Tolstoy, the Napoleonic War. Nobody's really alive from then. That's how bad it was.
No, Anna Karenina has jokes in it. I mean, that dinner with Steve is really funny. Yeah. I mean, to me, to me, writing is talking about the mysteries, things we can't talk about without story. And isn't one of the great mysteries that we all live our lives where, terrible things happen to us and we're weeping, and then the next day we're laughing, and anyone who's ever been through a terrible experience in their life has known that. And isn't that one of the most amazing, intriguing and mysterious things about being a human being? So why on earth is that not the business of fiction?
It's true that if you, it occurs to me on a frequent basis that if someone newly arrived to Australia and was interested in books and didn't know anything at all about Australian literature, and they came to someone and said, oh, well, let's sit down and tell me what the most popular, the best, the prize-winning books were for the last 3 years. I'll read them all. And if they read them, they could be forgiven for believing that Australia is the most broken, miserable, fucked up place on the planet, when clearly it's not.
But tragedy is an important part of comedy. You actually, it needs something to weigh it down. So anything that's funny actually has to have quite an undercurrent of something else in it. And that's when you come to talk about the idea of the distance between comedy and tragedy. And I think it was it Mel Brooks who said, tragedy is me cutting my finger and comedy is you falling into an open sewer and dying. And it's kind of that idea about there has to, the tragedy of things, you know, that famous cartoon with those guys working on a skyscraper and one of them has fallen and has the other one by the trousers and the trousers are falling down and he says, "Stop laughing, this is serious." You know that one? Like there has to be something underpinning it that's actually quite tragic.
But why are these books so popular in Australia? I mean, these are the books that win prizes, that get on awards shortlists, that everyone talks about, that are often in the top 10 when you go to bookstores. You know, why are we so fascinated with, considering Australian life is generally, compared to a lot of other places in the world, paradise?
Yeah.
Why are we so concerned with the grim side of life? Is it guilt? Is it because we have such a great life that we feel guilty? We need to wallow a little bit in misery?
I don't know.
I don't do much wallowing, but I mean, but you are a bit Pollyanna-ish. I mean, you know, Australia's a beer garden built on a cemetery, you know, mass grave. You know, I mean, it's so. You know, the books that attempt to dig down into that or deal with that kind of aspect of things, I need them. I kind of value them, but they do have. They are then given a kind of sort of moral authority by the kind of arbiters.
But it's interesting in crime. Humour in crime really does interest me because I think you do need something, especially those really gory crimes, you know, those really dead body chopping up kind of things. Don't you need comedy to make that balance work for crime more than other things, do you think? No? Well, I suppose, you know, there's not many jokes in Game of Thrones, is there? It's all...
Oh,
is
yes.
There?
Oh,
is there lots?
Oh.
I don't actually watch it because I'm not sufficiently desensitised to
the
violence.
bit where they stabbed Seinfeld through the eye with a fork, I thought that was fantastic.
But okay, let's play devil's advocate then. If you know, there's an absence of humour from a lot of Australian, you know, award-winning books or popular books, is that possibly a good thing? Have we been having such a ball in Australia and laughing our bollocks off for so long now that we need to actually sit down and write a bunch of serious books and grow up a bit and take ourselves seriously and mature as a nation in our literature? Is it time for that?
I still like I haven't read the new Steve Tolstoy, but it's on my pile.
Yeah, I've read
so
that.
A Fraction of the Whole, I suppose, stands out to me a bit. I think it was 2008 when that book came out. And it really made such an impression on me because it really made the most of this ridiculousness, I suppose, of so much of what's going on in Australian culture.
I just reviewed his new book, Quicksand, for ABR. And in my review I said, and as soon as I wrote it, I thought, oh, Christ, the truth sort of slipped out, you know. I said that this could be the funniest book ever to win the Miles Franklin, although it'll probably win nothing at all.
Right. Yeah.
So that's another example of a very, very funny book that
Yeah.
I think may well get pushed to one side when it comes to awards and so on next year, because are people jealous of humour? Is that what it is? Do they just think, oh, it's a world that I can't possibly
Not my experience.
relate to?
No.
I bought in some show and tells.
Right.
Tell us a joke.
This, I think, is so fascinating, and it really goes into what you're talking about, because this is Homesickness by Murray Bale. I don't know if any of you know this book. It's 1981, and it's hilarious, beginning to end. And I think I've read the last 4 or 5 Murray Bales, and there's nothing like even remotely slightly funny in them. So, and I see the same in the career of Peter Carey and the same in the people who have really long careers. It sort of fades out of them. And that's something that interests me as well, how people's style as respect to humour changes so often over the course of it. This one I also think is really interesting, The Fine Colour of Rust by P.A. O'Reilly. P.A. O'Reilly also writes literary fiction under her name of Paddy O'Reilly, but she actually differentiates her funny books from her serious books by using her initials for these instead of her serious ones. So it's almost like she doesn't see them as the same.
Is there no humour in her other ones then?
Not a lot, but I think maybe she's concerned about, steering readers in like having them expect something and pick up something different. So she actually differentiates the funny books from the serious books. And this one I just brought along because I thought it was hilarious. The funniest book from last year, Anson Cameron's The Last Pulse, which is just completely hilarious, but just insults Queenslanders all the way through, which just amused me no end. But I don't know how many books he sells in Queensland. Maybe not a lot.
Nobody does. There's no book market in Queensland.
Do you feel the expectation to be funny, Deb?
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the fact that because Offspring became quite a comic show, actually it drifted beyond my comic ability. So I always felt I was standing on my tippy toes every episode trying to be funny enough. But because it was comedy drama, if a scene wasn't laugh out loud funny, that would be a drama scene. So so that was handy. I can't imagine having the obligation to be funny all the time. I'm definitely not a comic writer. I think I see myself as a full service storyteller. I just think you should jam everything in that you can jam in. I sometimes think of it as I can see that a black and white photograph, a very sort of stark black and white photograph, has a certain kind of, and maybe the kind of very serious novels that you're talking about that are so lauded are the equivalent of that a very sort of stark black and white photograph can have a kind of eloquence and can direct our attention in a way. But personally, I'd like to paint with lots of colours, and I sometimes think that kind of restriction of the palette, the emotional palette, is actually about a kind of desiccation, not about skill. It's actually just about people are scared to try. I think there's this real fear of being seen to be sentimental in Australia, and well, is it Australia or is it all literary fiction? I mean, I don't know. It's interesting that you're asking about Australia, because is the prize and literary respect system in the UK and the US particularly different? Do you know?
Well, Howard Jacobson won the Booker a few years ago.
But it was considered notable.
Yeah.
I mean, people talked about it.
But also the one that was Vernon Godlittle won it in 2003 or something. I thought that was hilarious, beginning to end. But somehow that doesn't seem to count. People don't include that as a comic novel. That's D.B.C. Pierre. I thought that was hilarious. But I can't think of funny books winning the Miles, no.
I mean, I think you undersell yourself a little bit though, Deb. Because I mean, you're the one of us who's written a book most recently. It just came out a few months ago. It's called Useful, and it's about a chap who has had such a failure in life really, and he decides to kill himself at the beginning of the book. It's not giving anything away, but he fails at that too, and then decides to give one of his kidneys to a complete stranger to try and make himself feel useful in life. But the whole process he has to go through in doing that turns him into sort of a much better person. It's a very sort of serious subject matter in that book. There's lots of stuff about suicide and just,
but hilarious.
Right. Well, it's not what you would say like a book of high comedy, but there is a lightness and deftness of touch, which I said to you by email. That it does feel like a sort of like it's been spritzed all the time. You can read it without feeling like you're being bogged down in absolute misery. And that's not to say that you've included lots of jokes, but you've written it with a sort of more lightness of touch that makes it more readable. And I wonder if that's a skill that maybe you don't, big yourself up enough about that a lot of people don't have.
I suppose I don't. I'm not conscious of sort of adding humour. It's more that I find human situations so ridiculous, even when it's grim. I mean, there's one quite slapstick scene where a woman carries her father's dead body from one flat to another in a fitted sheet like a hammock. And anyone who's lost somebody knows that's how much you laugh when you're organising funerals. And or is it just me? Me and my sister. I have tried very hard to be deadly serious. So it's more to me that I can't stop. Maybe comedy is wrong, but I can't stop humour coming into it because that's how I see the world, and people are just ridiculous. And our policy on Offspring was quite specific, that every episode we wanted people to laugh and cry and get half a mongrel. That was the kind of, we would look at every episode and think, have we achieved that? Do you not know that expression?
I've never heard that one.
Oh, he's a foreigner.
Half a mongrel, is that an erection? Or?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So that was our goal. and well, it's a goal in your writing too, and don't deny it. So we quite purposely set out, we'd feel we'd failed if people hadn't laughed in an episode.
Right.
But I'd be terrified if I felt... Like, writing funny is so hard. It's much harder, don't you think?
Do you have to be born funny? Do you have to be a naturally funny person, Shane, to write humour? Or can it be something that you learn as a writer?
I don't know.
No.
Well, I mean, you always learn things as you go along as a writer, but it depends on your world outlook, I think, I mean, the kind of sort of person... I mean, you couldn't imagine Gerard Henderson writing a comic novel, could you? I mean, it's just... there are clearly people who don't have a sense of humour. I mean, it's extremely rare, but they in themselves then become potentially... well, for a start, they're extremely... everything else about them is extremely dubious, I think.
Yes.
I like this thing where we talked about what we thought was funny in Australian writing, Australian writers, because I'd like to say that I thought there have been some remarkably funny and very successful and popular Australian books that have weathered well. That really so. I mean, I think that Clive James' Unreliable Memoirs is stitch-inducing, and was the first time I read it and the last time I read it.
And interesting, full of enormous sadness as well.
Yeah.
That of course they belong together, because they do in life. Yeah.
And Andrew McGann actually won, I think, one of the big prizes in 1998 or something for praise, because he was seen as the sort of new wave of Australian
and there was heroin in it, so that made
there was
it
heroin in it, so that counted.
Yeah.
But that featured the centre of that was a relationship between a woman, young woman who worked in a bottle shop, I think, but she had what I call singing detective condition. What is it? Psoriasis or something. Her whole skin was constantly inflamed, and her boyfriend was a premature ejaculator, and she had to be entirely smeared with ointment, and then he was undergoing some therapy where he had to count the number of thrusts before he ejaculated, and this relationship was at this, and I don't know if he was, attempting to be humorous, but I think the fundamental conceit at work was inherently humorous, even if the delivery of the rest of it was utterly, excruciatingly deadpan. So, it can go both ways. Comedy, humour is not all kind of light. Evelyn Waugh is one of the funniest writers I've read, but he is mean and vicious and nasty, and even as you're laughing, you feel that you are sticking the knife into someone. So but you keep going for the lines, So it kind of cuts both ways, I think.
But I think it is partly a reflection of who you are as a person. I remember when I was talking to you a few years back, and I asked what it was like getting your work translated, and you told me you once had an email from your Japanese translator with a question in it about one of the Murray Whelan books that said the Japanese translator wanted to know what is an unreconstructed Whitlamite.
Yeah. That was the French one, so
Was
that
it
was
French?
interesting.
All right.
We managed to have a discourse. I met the Japanese translator and within a few moments realised he couldn't speak English. Now, he may have been able to read and write English extremely well, but
how does Australian humour get translated in those? Like, do they think your books are funny, or international publishers?
well, my American publisher thought it was literature, which did me no favours at all because I couldn't sell any. And translating the book into American was perhaps the most challenging. He scratched me Duco with a 2-bob bit just doesn't work in American. And a man sitting at a bar who looks at the clock and realises it's late and thinks to himself, well, time to hit the frog, gets a message that says, where did the frog come from and why is he hitting it? So, yes, there can be some difficulties in
I had a play
translating.
on in Japanese, and I went and saw the performance, and the audience was very quiet. They didn't laugh in the bits where I was used to people laughing, and afterwards I asked Wada-san, the director, and he said, yes, many Australian writers worry about that. He said, we're Japanese, we laugh inside. so maybe people are laughing inside.
Tony, you teach creative writing. Do you
do.
talk about humour with your
I
students?
try to avoid it at all times because I think it's a difficult thing to teach. I've bought a few books and I'm kind of scared to open them in case somehow intellectualising it kind of stuffs whatever it is that I've got going on. So I haven't actually opened them. But the students always want to know how to do it. Oh. And I just kind of brush it off, really, and try and talk about something else. I spend a lot of time on writing about sex. I know you write a lot about those kind of scenes, Chris. And I go through the Bad Sex Writing Awards with them, and we analyse that, and that's really quite funny. So that sort of sex meets humour class is probably my funniest class.
Do you think it can be taught, funny writing?
I don't know. It's interesting because I think Australians, maybe a bit like the Irish, are quite good storytellers.
Yeah. And
so when people tell stories to their friends, people know how to tell a funny story. Most people. I mean, there are a few exceptions. Yeah. Gerard Henderson, of course, him, but not you. I mean, Gerard Henderson there. But people know how to be funny when they tell a story, and it's somehow when they sit down to write, they seize up and feel they have to sort of, it has to be proper and not funny. And so maybe it's a question of getting people to take themselves telling a story and then write it down and realise that people have natural timing and they know how to hold the punchline and which bits are funny, and people, human beings are natural storytellers, so they, people can maybe harness that.
But part of it is also surprise, I think. Anything that is funny enough to make someone laugh on the page has to be something unexpected. So I do kind of a lot of exercises with my students about maybe not considering the very first line of dialogue that pops into your head, because that might be the very first line that the reader pops into their head. Work a bit harder. What else might they say? What else might they say? And we do this one exercise where they have to come up with 20 different options, just to force them to work a bit harder to get to that unexpected bit. And then when something's unexpected, I think it's much easier to make it funny.
I think the other thing too is sometimes if you get people to actually imagine through what would actually happen in a particular scenario, like your one about the forensic thing, it's just actually if you imagine what would actually have to be done at this point. Mm-hmm. So one of the, I guess the most high comedy bits in useful is if you're going to donate your kidney, you have to have a whole lot of tests, and one of them is a 24-hour urine collection. We have to collect all your urine that you excrete for 24 hours. And so my character has it in a big jar in the fridge. So, and if you imagine, and then somebody finds it and he has to explain that it's urine and it's his urine in case that makes it better, and does it, not sure. But the minute you think through the steps of what would actually happen, and if you play that out, because life is ridiculous, there'll be funny stuff there without you having to try very hard at all.
Yeah, it's true.
But then, if that's the case, then why are so many novels not funnier if they're supposed to be capturing the human experience the way they do?
Well, the trouble is you're asking. See, you need to have 3 humorless writers and ask them. I don't know. I wish people would be funnier. There are writers, I'm not going to name names, there are writers that I know who are really funny and they write really serious books. And I don't get it. But, well, because people want to be taken seriously. That's a very big vanity out there, and I share it. You know.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Oh, and sometimes there are some things that you might want to approach in your work that are extremely difficult to approach through humour. You know, I've been struggling with the Murray Whelan novel for some time because the period in his life and the issues and so on concern refugees in detention, you know, the war on terror and so on. And, you know, while this is, you know, rife with absurdity and you know, hypocrisy and, you know, all of the usual kind of grist for the humour mill, you know, there's a kind of reality about it that makes it really difficult to crack funny. And there are very, very few people who can do that. You know, there's a book I read a couple of years ago called Worst Date Ever. Jane Busman, who was a journalist and a screenwriter, and decided that she would be a serious writer, and so she Googled the most evil man in the world, and it came up with Joseph Kony. Now, this was set several years ago, so she decided that she'd go and interview Joseph Kony and use that as the basis for a book. And the book is just hilarious, and but it deals with these. You know, she falls in love with a guy. She said, you know, with an aid worker, and she says, you know, this guy was incredible. He could fuck any refugee he wanted. You know, and there's something kind of sort of you reel back from this because there are indeed subjects that it's very difficult to sustain any kind of humour about. I mean, people might pop up and say a funny line in the middle of things, but to say, well, you know, I'm going to explore this subject from a humorous perspective. You know, there are some things. There are some fields that are more promising than others, and different. You know, I think it's just kind of different. Different kinds of novels try to do different things.
One of the things I think that's really, I really agree with that. But one of the things we did on the show on Offspring was we got much more bold about flipping the tone, and in fact, after a while, it became a bit of a game for us that I think audiences, and I think it's true for readers too, are happy to go from something really grim and moving to something very funny and back again, and it actually doesn't rob either one of its power. In fact, if anything, it increases the power. And I mean, there was one episode early on where we went from the darkest thing we'd ever done on the show, which was a baby died, and we went from the scene where the doctor gives the baby to the mother, and it was a full-on scene of this woman holding her dead baby and kissing it and so forth. Then that doctor went straight from there, Nina, the main character, went straight from there to a family dinner that was effectively a fast sequence, like really silly and funny. And the story was partly about the fact that she had to go from something serious to something farcical, and then she goes back to the hospital and has really red hot sex. So, and that was all in the space of about 12 minutes of screen time. And I think people actually enjoyed the flipping of tone, and it only added to your sense of sadness about the baby because she was then involved in this sort of ridiculous scene with her family.
Yeah, I think so too. Because it's the contrast. That's what makes it so interesting.
Then the need for sex, which is very important too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've just started watching season 3 of Orange is the New Black, which is a prison show set in a women's prison in America, and that very much captures that. It jumps from, you know, deadly serious to very funny to hot sex, and all within every episode, you know, and it's very successful.
Maybe that's what Brother Boylan meant when he was telling me about comic relief in Shakespeare just before he hit me.
Exactly.
Oh dear.
Well, he tried to beat it into me. It was a reasonable pedagogic approach. It sustained the order.
You've pretty much all said, I don't know if you've said it specifically, Tony, about, you know, being taken more seriously. By whom? Who do writers that include humour in their books want to be taken seriously by? the critics, the Americans? I don't know who.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's not readers, because readers completely get it. I had one review for my second book, which was like, the reviewer was like, well, what is it? Is it supposed to be a comedy, or is it supposed to be a drama? And readers have never said that to me. They completely understand that it's actually both. But yeah, I think there is. I don't know what it is.
Is it critics, Deborah?
I'm not sure really, because I think it's not a very logical. It's actually quite a childish urge. So I don't know that it's a very logical thing. It's not that I want my books to be more serious. I think I would like people to speak with more respect about books that have humour in them.
Right, I see. Yeah.
And not. I think there is a slightly reductive way that they're perceived.
I think certainly Australian critics, you could be forgiven for thinking they're the misery porn loving fun police, you know.
When I was writing my first book, actually, Chris, it's a romantic comedy, my first book edition, and then I put this ending on where the main character died of a drug overdose, and at the end of this romantic comedy, and my editor, when he was editing it, was like, so this is what you're going with, right? And I'm like, yeah, I've read enough Australian novels. I know how they're supposed to end. But I just kind of had this idea that was the way to do it. And it's only when I went back and thought about it and thought, oh, actually, no, of course that's not the way to do it. I can do it however I like. That I changed the ending. So she does not die in the end. It's good.
It's a famous apocryphal story about your book, isn't it, that the ending was changed?
Yeah, yeah.
Who was your editor?
Michael Hayward.
Michael Hayward, yeah.
Prize shortlists do help your sales. So it would, I mean, if my main goal is always to get my book read by as many people as I can manage. And so prizes help. I mean, unfortunately, with children's books they definitely do.
Yeah.
But with adult books they do too. So that's one thing. But I don't know. Is it some ridiculous, pathetic desire for respect? I mean, it's not an urge that I'm proud of, and I want you all to slap me till I stop. Please, you can all slap me. That should do it. Actually, there's enough people there.
So I think if Shane won the Miles Franklin, then we could just draw a line under this whole thing, and that's
right.
We could, yeah. I'd like to be taken more seriously. I'd like to be taken more seriously by the loans officer at the Westpac Bank.
Yes. When he sees your income for the income tax return. We've got about 15 minutes left, folks, so we're going to go to questions shortly. If any of you have a question, think of it, and we have some roving microphones who will come to you. Before we do that, I just want
That's actually a job here. Yeah, they have interns. Yeah, an intern roving microphone. You fill in a form, job title, roving microphone. That's
a job for us, perhaps, you know, make some money from it. I just want to talk a little bit about the link between perhaps humour and imagination. And this is sort of what I was getting at when I sort of made that sort of offhand remark about Shane winning the Miles Franklin, because when I think of the books that do, you know, get up in these awards, like, for me, they're actually not as good as a lot of books that will incorporate humour, because they just seem less complete and less realistic. So I would like to actually see a book like one of Shane's win an award like that, because to me that's a more...
Not as much as me, I bet.
I think he would too. Yeah.
Clearly he would, you know. I wonder, is there a link between humour and imagination? Terry Pratchett, rest in peace, he was a writer who specialised in both of those things. He said stories of imagination tend to upset those without one. And he could equally have said that about humour. Stories of humour tend to upset those without one. And if you think about memoir, which is a huge, you know, genre in the modern day, it's never really about the funny times in a person's life, is it? Do you think, is there a link between humour and imagination? Is imaginative writing inherently humorous?
I have to disagree with this prospect. I think plenty of people who write things that I would not call funny or humorous at all have wild and amazing imaginations. There's something else going on, I think. There's a different thing going on there for me.
That's me slapped down.
Sorry about that.
I suppose the only thing I can think of that would connect with that is the idea I said a moment ago about sometimes if you imagine your way fully into a situation,
Right.
there will be all kinds of tones in it. Instead of going there and thinking, I'm going to shine a light on this terrible, miserable part of life. But if you actually imagined your way fully into that world, there will be humour and joy in it because it's about human beings. So if someone really imagined their way into, a working class story in Ireland, it'll be funny and great because that's real.
Are you saying the Irish are just funny people?
No, but it will be grim and funny and everything in between.
You think we're clowns?
It's very easy, isn't it? We got there eventually.
But you do talk funny.
Wow.
This is going to get all Goodfellas in a minute. We're clowns. We're here to amuse you. Let's take some questions. Anyone got any questions? Promise not to put my hand up like that. Any questions from the audience at all? Is there someone down the back? The roving mics can probably tell better than me.
This is for Shane. Is Murray Whelan based on anyone that you met? Or is he a figment of your imagination?
You'd have to contact my solicitor, I think, for a fully detailed response to that question. Certainly some of the characters in the books are drawn from life, but they're not all drawn from the same life. Sometimes various body parts are stitched together. Someone might be wearing Kim Carr's suit, but have Bill Shorten's moral code, for example. So some of the characters are drawn from life, and then scribbled on by me.
Do we have someone else down there? There's someone in the middle. Oh, yeah.
To the writer of A Secret Life of Us and Offspring, would you consider putting them into books, like transcribing?
Putting the characters of Offspring into a book?
Yeah, and like Secret Life of Us and things.
I really don't think so, because I think my sense of those characters is so bound up with those actors, and in many cases we wrote knowing who we were writing for. No, I think that story's been told, actually. I'm going to recycle one of my plays into a novel because, we were talking earlier about feeling sometimes that you could go around and tell people the story of your book quicker than you could write a book, given the... Anyway, that's a bit how I feel about the theatre. So I'm going to have another crack at that. And actually revisiting characters you've written before I'm finding it a really joyous experience because I love them and I'm happy to be with them again. But no, the Offspring people, they've had their life. They can go on with their lives without me now, I think.
Someone in the middle here?
Hi, I was just going to ask, you guys were talking a lot about how humour is dying, I guess, in the Australian writing scene. Do you think there's a chance for it to come back and to become really successful in Australian writing? Do you think we can see more of it?
Definitely. Who doesn't like it? Who doesn't love to laugh? It's just such a wonderful and universal thing. And I actually think it's kind of an act of rebellion against the state of everything. If you can make somebody laugh with the country the way it is and with people feeling the way it is, and you open the paper and you see the depression statistics and everything, I think it's something that's a therapeutic tool. And once we start to imagine our lives is better and the place is better, I think that's much easier for us to follow through and do something about it. When things become overwhelmingly grim, that's when you want to pull the covers over your head and not do anything. It's a tool for engagement. So I think there definitely will be a revival. And you look at some of the great Australian books of the last few years, like you look at the Rosie Project and these kind of books, they're hilarious. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I do wonder if we're reaching peak. Was it someone said, I daren't say it, I'll get myself in trouble. There was a writer in The Guardian said we've reached peak memoir and peak middle-aged person sads.
Yeah.
Where we can't really go any further. We've heard all everyone's grim little story, and I wonder if we'll come through all that stuff and the very serious books about World War I and that we have every year, and the very serious sort of rural dramas where someone's struggling against the odds on a remote cattle farm, whether we'll just like get through all that and we'll just turn the corner and say, you know what?
Yep.
Don't want to read any of those books anymore.
Yep.
What else you got?
And that's going to be the stuff that will arm us for future, for making the place better.
Yes. I think E or he doesn't agree.
Grumpy Cat is about to speak.
Yeah, well, it's like what Peter Cook said about, you know, the Berlin cabarets, how you know, how influential they had been in preventing the rise of Hitler and fending off the Second World War. You know, if we're talking about books, I think that's one category. But we're swamped with a kind of humour at the moment, which is on two levels. One of them is that we're ruled by malignant buffoons, and the response to them is, you know, rapier satire. Meanwhile, they're still in power, you know, and they're still doing the damage. You know, fascism these days doesn't wear a natty uniform. It wears a clown's suit, and you know, if humour is to service any good purpose, then I've yet to see it, apart from the feeling you get when you laugh, which is, of course, a deeply human one, and therefore counterposed to that which would turn us into beasts and machines. It's an assertion of our humanity, but I'm not too sure what else good it can do us under the present circumstances. I reckon we shouldn't be joking. We should be fighting.
But the humour of discomfort has risen quite a lot in recent years. Do you think we need to be made more uncomfortable by humour to the point where we need to act?
Well, I don't think the people who we want that I would like to act on are made uncomfortable by humour. You know, I mean, if you are in an organisation which takes, I don't know, Christopher Pine seriously, then I think there's a crisis of humour at work here. You know, that a few good jokes and a well-written humorous novel are unlikely to kind of resolve. You know, I think humour is, you know, at its best, an expression of our fundamental kind of human resilience, and therefore I like to see it. And there are very few pleasures greater than laughing. But whether comedy or humour can serve some wider purpose, I'm not convinced of that at all. Sorry to be a downer about that. I should have a kind of punchline. But there you go.
Yeah, but surely it already has. Like, I don't know if many people remember that cartoon from a couple of years ago. It was made famous on climate change, and it was a cartoon of a scientist standing up at a whiteboard saying something like clean energy, solar power, electric cars. What if climate change is all a big ruse and we do all this good stuff for nothing? And it did kind of crack through that the prejudice of people, because it was funny. And I don't know where it comes from, but one of my friends is always quoting some line which is something like, nothing can withstand the assault of laughter. And I think comedy can be a really good tool sometimes for the ultra serious things and the really big questions of big prejudices, I guess.
I think you're right. I think it can be kind of a Trojan horse to get people where they might not otherwise want to think about it. You can kind of, you know, disguise it a bit and sort of get it into people's heads in that way.
Did you ever use a Trojan horse on the show? Was there a particular political or serious issue you wanted to
Oh,
get across?
no, we weren't conscious of it. I suppose there are things. I mean, there's something really. I'm proud of the fact that we did all certain kinds of stories on a primetime commercial network. You know, that we got away with. We got away with stuff. I don't know how we got away with some of it. We'd come up with some stuff in the story room and think, we'll never get away with this. And we did, because I think sometimes people on the network didn't understand it. Like, drop your bucket in the dirt. We thought, we'll never... Anyway, things we got through.
Sorry, drop your bucket in the dirt?
We'll talk later. It was one of the most Googled things when that episode went to air. I suppose I think I'm torn between sharing Shane's view and wanting to be more, because I'm such a Pollyanna. I think if you imagine a world where there is no humour, then that's pretty terrible, isn't it? So I think we then have to assume that it is doing some good, because if you imagine a world without it...
You're on my side, Deborah. You can't hide it.
I think to me it comes down to empathy, and if you can grow empathy, then people are less likely to be vile to each other. The trouble is the numbers are so small with books. We can't, enough people can't read them.
But your show would have reached a lot of people.
Yeah, a fair few, yeah. But still, it's it's limited.
Is it preaching to the converted as well?
I think there's often an element of people preaching to the converted, isn't there? I mean, there's a lot of storytelling that really is inviting the reader or the audience to go, yes, I knew that. And I don't know that does a lot of good. That just kind of fortifies people's opinionatedness, doesn't it? What I like about storytelling is when it sneaks around opinion and makes you sort of empathise with someone in a visceral way that you wouldn't normally feel for. That's the best stuff.
Well, that's probably a pretty good place to end it. We're at 7:15. I'm sorry if we've preached to the converted tonight. You may all have come along sharing the same views that we do. Thank you very much for coming to the Wheeler Centre tonight. Please put your hands together for our guests, Deb Oswald, Shane Maloney and Tony Jordan.